In watching deer these past couple of years, we've had such an influx of deer. The moose have moved out. The elk are pushing them out. We have a few elk here. To the north of us, we have some big herds of elk. But deer are, they're just very family-like in a lot of ways. They have a lot of affection for one another. They play a lot, almost kind of like a typical human family, really. Little rivalries here and there, and pecking orders, of course, and stuff. But they also are such amazing critters for the forest, because I didn't realize they ate so much wood. They eat willow and just stems and poplar, like these things. They'll eat the rose bushes and the dry grass. They'll nibble on the buds of any sorts of bush and tree, and they'll even eat fir. They like fir, some pine and spruce trees. They'll eat the needles and even sometimes little bits of the branches. And they just kind of walk underneath them, the trees, and they break some of the branches off once in a while, but not very much. They're very gentle, but they also just help maintain the forest. They just sort of keep the lower growth on the floor, the forest floor, they're kind of like weeders or gardeners in a sense. And what's also really neat is like cows. I grew up on a cattle ranch, but cows can be really good for the forest as well, but they're also very hard on forests. They'll take all the branches off the bottom because they're rubbing on all the trees, and they'll rub a lot of bark off, and they'll even kill trees just by rubbing on them too much. They're too domesticated. They've kind of lost a lot of their connection to the reason for them to be in the forest. They just sort of use the forest. I find that behavior interesting too, because a lot of humans are so much that way. We've been that way for so much. We've had disconnect. Whereas the deer, unless they get too numerous, of course, but if you get too many of anything, it's hard on stuff. They help take care of the forest. And they sometimes bring in diseases like ticks, but these are really healthy deer this year. They've got a healthy coat on them, and they're not doing any harm. And they'll stay out of the garden and the yard if you train them to. You just sort of scoot them out every time they come in, and they learn after a while. And they're just quite pleasant to have around. They're quite friendly. Generally, they keep their distance. I've never been charged by one. They're not dangerous at all. Sometimes the bucks, a really dominant buck, might have a little bit of aggression to them. A few hundred kilometers south of here, I was around some aggressive deer. A little bit different environment, different place. It was in a town as well. I don't know what would have provoked it, but it was a little more aggressive for sure. So you have to be aware and just go individual deer by individual. But people ask from the city, like, you get scared of deer and cougar and bear and stuff. Well, you have to just be aware about, what their habits are. Observe them. That's why I'm putting these videos up, just observing their behavior and seeing what they do and seeing what's important to them and what they're after. And sure, their cougar, bear, deer, everything gets the rogue ones, and they can be very dangerous, very aggressive, very stalking or sneaky or just persistent. But that's generally not the case, and especially around here. They're just very respectful, and we all keep our distance. And of course, their hooves, they're like sheep, or they help to aerate the soil because they're very sharp hooves, and they're always moving, so they're constantly pushing in the soil, helping to aerate that, pushing in seeds when they walk, helping to plant, really, is what they're doing from all the seeds that have scattered across in the springtime and the winter, and they're putting the seeds into the ground. They do an awful lot for the forest. Of course, when they poop all over the place, they do that a lot, but they're fertilizing the forest. There's an awful lot that they do, and I think it's really neat to observe. And they'll move through an area. They don't stay in an area. They very rarely will kill a tree. They'll eat the bark off or half of it or a third of it, but they don't girdle it. Like we're trying to girdle these trees for firewood, but also because they're close to our buildings and we're doing fire abatement. But the tree doesn't girdle very well. We're learning you really gotta cut into it a lot more. But they do die. That one finally died behind there. But deer don't do that very rarely, unless they just get carried away because the tree is so tasty. I've seen that, where they just sort of forget about what they usually do, and the tree tastes so good they just sort of eat away, and then before you know it, they've killed the tree. But it's very rare. Generally, they can come back to it next year or the year after, and it'll be there for them. But I just think it's so fun to watch critters, and to have a habitat for them to be in and to thrive in, so you know that what you're doing is working, because the habitat is they like it because they're in it, and they're healthy and they're doing well. I also try to figure out their language a little bit. With cows, if you bow your head and nod, look up in the eye and nod, it's a bit of a language for them, and they understand that. Deer are different. They don't bob their head in the same meaning. I keep trying it. So when that doe just put his head down and I did the same back, sometimes it means that they have to, that it goes as a territorial thing or something. I'm not sure. It's interesting that but they have a very different body language than cows do. And because I only have known cows, I haven't really observed deer as much as I have cattle. I could communicate with cows quite well, but their sounds, but deer hardly even make sounds. So they're a very quiet animal, but they do have quite a lot of body language, but I'm still learning it. But the way they walk or bounce or move, it will change depending on what they're doing. Not just because they're trying to get across the ground differently, but it's a type of language, how they walk. It's what I'm observing. They're behind the trees. They can be really hard to see coming out over here now. And of course the ears, always listening with the ears, and they're always aware and alert. Very careful about what they're doing in their environment, and how they're being watched and what's watching them. They'll also go through a forest the easiest path possible, like on trails, but they'll also spread out and they can go through a forest one by one and like in a fan, but generally they go head to tail kind of thing. They just follow one another, pack a spot down. We have some pretty worn trails around here. And I'm not trying to encourage deer growth. We have a lot of deer in the area. They're getting more and more numerous. But we've also had, I think, 3 deer in the last couple of years, no, 4, that have died by either being hit on the road or just natural death, and find their bodies out in the forest. And they've, whatever, they've met their demise somehow. And so nature does its thing. They are increasing in their numbers, but it's a good year this year for them. But who knows? The summer might be really dry, may not be very much grass for them or water, or more predators might come along at some point because they're being pushed out of the mountains and the hills, and because there's too much fire, they need more food down here. There's a balance generally, except when humans get involved and then we try and manage things, and that usually screws everything up. Our management approach is just, there's not enough observation, I don't think. People need to take a look and see what they're actually doing, what the critters need, what they do, how good they are for a certain area, and what they do that's be detrimental to an area, but why are they doing it? Critters usually aren't detrimental to anything. It's not who they are to be detrimental to something. They're helping with the balance of the trees and the forest and the plants, soil. So it's a lot to be learned by just observing. And that's why my majority of my videos are just no sound or no talking. They're just watching, because you can learn a lot. If you like this content, hit the thumbs up, subscribe. I would love it to be able to carry on and keep doing this and know that you're enjoying them. Cheers.